Hello, everyone. This is Maria Zampatulis, Senior Research Associate at the National Library of Patient Rights and Advocacy, the Power of the Patient Project, a volunteer-led and run organization that aims to empower the patient through research, education, and advocacy. Joining us today as our guest on the Pulse series is Dr. James R. Doty, a neurosurgeon, professor of medicine at Stanford University, the founder and director at the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, and also a New York Times bestselling author of Into the Magic Shop, a neurosurgeon's journey, a neurosurgeon's quest to discover the mysteries of the brain and the secrets of the heart, and the newly released Mind Magic, the Neuroscience of Manifestation and How It Changes Everything. Dr. James Doty is also a champion of patient rights and advocacy, and we're so grateful to have you taking this time to meet with us and sharing in this conversation. So to start, I wanted to talk about a very special person on your journey whose name is Ruth, and you talk about Ruth in your first book, Into the Magic Shop, and how she changed the course of your life's trajectory. So I want to start there. Really, it's just such a testimony, an affirmation, and a celebration, really, of the power of love to transform one's life and, in turn, countless others. So as a young child, you walked into a magic shop and you met this very special woman named Ruth. Can you share with our audience a little bit about your early beginnings and the circumstances around your life and how Ruth helped you to learn what you've described as being the most important magic for transcending your experiences and achieving all of your heart's desires, really?
Well, sure. So basically, I grew up in challenging circumstances. My father was an alcoholic. My mother had had a stroke when I was a child, had a seizure disorder, was partially paralyzed, and unfortunately became chronically depressed, attempted suicide multiple times. Um, we were on public assistance. So you can imagine this is not the best circumstance for a child to grow up in if one wants to be quote unquote successful by, if you will, societal standards. Uh, what changed for me was that, as I mentioned, I grew up in this very chaotic, unstable, unpredictable environment, and would arguments would occur or challenging circumstances, oftentimes I would get on my bicycle and ride as far and as fast as I could away from my house. And on one of those excursions, I ended up at a strip mall where there was a magic shop. And I'd had an interest in magic for some time. And I went in there, and the owner wasn't there, but his mother was there. And she was a woman in her mid 50s, probably. And I actually was about 12. And filled with hopelessness, a sense of despair, uncertainty. I didn't see myself as having a future, although I wanted to be a doctor, if you will. Uh, this woman, when I walked in, it was quite amazing. And I'm sure probably everyone listening has met a person who has a radiance about them and this kindness and presence. And she had this incredible radiant smile. And she did not look down at me, which is very common with adults, especially if it's interacting with a poor child. She was not dismissive. She greeted me, treated me like I was her equal, and we began a conversation, which in and of itself resulted in something amazing, which was I had a sense of psychological safety. And for kids from my environment, you're fearful, anxious, and you don't feel that way. And as a result, you shut down. But in this instance, I was very open. We had a wonderful conversation. And after about 15 or 20 minutes, she said to me, she said, I really like you. I'm here for another 6 weeks. And if you show up, I think I could teach you something that could help you. Now, I didn't know what that was at the time, but I immediately agreed, and primarily for two reasons. One is I had absolutely nothing else to do, and two is she was giving me chocolate chip cookies. So I did show up, and so for the next 6 weeks, we met in the back room of this magic shop, and she taught me a way to change how I interacted with the world and saw the world. And ultimately, that interaction with her, which included a mindfulness practice and a manifestation practice, changed the trajectory of my life.
Just amazing. And reading it and reading that connection she was able to build with you was so powerful, and the way you recounted it. Um, which brings me to my next question, Dr. Doty, about really love, and just love, the symbol of love, the heart, which many people know as a very basic, or well, not basic, very important organ, but
It's
see it
basic, but
very,
it's
yeah, see it very traditionally, I guess, if you will. And so in your book, Into the Magic Shop, you talk about some of the lesser known facts about the heart and how this organ in actuality sends more messaging to the brain than the brain does to it. So this is something that I have also become very familiar with through the work of Dr. Eben Alexander and Karen Newell in their book, Living in a Mindful Universe. In this book, they reference research conducted by the HeartMath Institute, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping people bring their physical, mental, and emotional systems into balanced alignment with their heart's intuitive guidance. Really, what I'd like for you to share with our audience is more about this influence and impact that of the heart and how it impacts the brain in ways that they might not be familiar with.
Yeah, it does seem strange that your heart does have these signals. To back up a little bit, there is a large nerve called the vagus nerve, which emanates from the brainstem or has its origins, which is distributed through the major organ systems in the body, the greatest in the heart. It's not a one-way street, but a two-way street. One part of that is the sympathetic nervous system, or the flight, fight, or fear response, as it's known by many people. And that's sort of an ancient system. And then the more recent system is the parasympathetic nervous system, um, which many call the rest and digest system. And of course, early on in the evolution of our species, of course, threat was of the greatest concern. And as a result, this system evolved, and it was really meant to deal with immediate threat and then go down, if you will, in terms of its valence, or goes away, and then you go back to your rest and digest system. So it was never meant to be on all the time. The problem with modern society is that, unlike many years ago, where we lived in villages, we were born, we died there, they were small villages, everyone knew us, we lived in intergenerational families, and uh, we felt loved. And of course, then in that context, we're always engaging our parasympathetic nervous system. And as a result, this connection to others makes our physiology, both brain and peripheral physiology, work at their best. Um, but it's also associated with an increase in longevity. And in fact, if you look at the work of Bob Buettner, the Blue Zones, where he talks about these areas in the world where people still live as we did many generations ago, these individuals live longer, they're more content, and the most important thing is they connect with others. Or you can look at the study that is now led by Robert Waldinger at Harvard, which was called the Adult Development Study, but is more commonly called the Longevity and Happiness Study, where they followed a large number of undergraduates, now over 85 years, And again, the critical finding is that people who are connected to others, have depth of relationships, are happier, and they live longer. So the key is, how do you decrease the stimulation of your sympathetic nervous system in our modern society? Because for many people, it's chronically activated. And unlike how we lived in villages hundreds of years ago, in the modern world, we are not living with our intergenerational relatives. We do not necessarily have people who we know and trust in our near environment. We're required to have jobs. We're required to pay rent. And basically, there's a lot of pressure on people to survive. And as a result, for many people, this chronically activates their sympathetic nervous system, or this fear response. Conversely, if you're able to engage your parasympathetic nervous system, what's interesting is you're more productive, you're more creative, you're more thoughtful, your physiology, both brain and peripheral, function at their best. You mentioned HeartMath, which I actually know quite well. And they use something called heart rate variability, which in some ways is a measure of activation of your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. When your heart rate variability actually is increased, now I don't want people to confuse heart rate variability with heart rate. Those are two different things, and I'll explain shortly. But when you engage your parasympathetic nervous system, your heart rate variability is increased, which may seem a paradox. And when you're stressed and anxious, it decreases. And of course, a decrease in heart rate variability is associated with a high incidence of sudden cardiac death. The difference between heart rate variability and heart rate is what we call the interbeat distance or time. If you're stressed and anxious, the interbeat difference, let's say your heart rate is 60, between each beat, it's about 1 second. If you're calm and relaxed, actually, your heart rate variability is increased so that the variability may vary between a heartbeat occurring every 8/10 of a second versus 1.2 seconds. Although both people may have a heart rate of 60, there can be a vast, vast difference in terms of heart rate variability.
Wow, that's so fascinating, because I did not know that, and I'm sure many of our audience members do not also distinguish between heart rate and then heart rate variability and how you explain that. Thank you so much for sharing that wisdom with our audience. I wanted to circle back to what you noted about today's modern society and sort of the alienation and the fragmentation that occurs when we do live separately and we are disconnected from our extended family, from family members. Many of us live either alone or in dyads, and we're not nearly as connected as we once were. In your book, Into the Magic Shop, you state there is an epidemic of loneliness, anxiety, and depression in the world. There is an impoverishment of spirit and connection with one another. Studies show that 25% of Americans, and this may have increased since the book was written, have no one that they feel close enough with to share a problem. This means that one out of every 4 people you see or meet today has no one to talk to, and this lack of connection is affecting their health. You go on to say, isolation and loneliness puts us at a greater risk for early disease and death than smoking does. And similar sentiments were shared by the Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, who released a Surgeon General advisory in May of 2023 on America's epidemic of loneliness and isolation, which has which he is quoted as saying, our epidemic of loneliness and isolation has been an underappreciated public health crisis that has harmed individual and societal health. Our relationships are a source of healing and well-being, hiding in plain sight, one that can help us live healthier, more fulfilled, and more productive lives. He further states, given the significant health consequences of loneliness and isolation, we must prioritize building social connection the same way we have prioritized other critical public health issues, such as tobacco, obesity, and substance use disorders. Together, we can build a country that's healthier, more resilient, less lonely, and more connected. And I would even venture to say that the other public health crises are all interrelated with relational health and people's status of their relationships, that they're not separate issues, but all interconnected issues, possibly root causes of some of these other issues. And so in what ways, or what are some ways that you think individuals can begin to connect in more heart-centered ways with one another? And how can medical spaces in specific help to support or foster these kinds of connections?
Well, it's a very big problem. And the reason I say that, and I'm not trying to avoid your answer or answering the question, but when there's a sense that no one cares, then this results in many people spiraling downward. And as we were just discussing, if you don't feel you have connection to anyone, that creates the perfect environment for that to happen. And there are also some sort of core problems as well. When we have a society that at every step tries to remove the social safety network, then this creates a huge, huge negative impact. And what I mean by that is if there, as an example, no healthcare resources, if individuals are hungry, if there's housing insecurity, and there's an underlying narrative by some people that the root cause of the problem isn't lack of compassion or caring, but that somehow there is an external threat from minorities or immigrants, and that somehow the cause of not having enough resources to help each other is due to that, which on every a legitimate study that has ever been done has shown that not to be the case whatsoever. Then this creates a divisiveness among groups of people. Obviously, if you're given a narrative that the reason there are not enough jobs where you live is because of what I just described, then you have anger and hostility. But the reality is that this is a narrative created by corporate entities and the wealthy to take more and be extractive to, if you will, the person who's actually doing the work. And unfortunately, this has had a huge, huge negative effect on society because when you're constantly in fear because of financial insecurity and all the requisite aspects that that involves, then it's hard to be present. It's hard to be well adjusted. It's hard to be happy. And so it's a huge, huge issue. Certainly, and whether it's actually from physicians or the healthcare environment, everyone simply being kind, compassionate, thoughtful can have a huge, huge impact on everyone around you. As a physician, I will assure you that if an individual physician is thoughtful, kind, takes the time with the patient, the very nature of that actually has a huge positive impact. As a surgeon, even though that's what I primarily do, I will assure you that spending time with the patient, listening to them, caring, demonstrating you care, leaning forward, touching the patient, inquiring about them, has a huge impact, and this has been studied scientifically. When you create that type of an environment, a caring environment, it decreases anxiety and fear, which is, of course, anytime someone goes to a physician, they frequently have that. And if you're going to operate on somebody, if you're able to give that to them, it actually decreases the amount of anesthesia they need. It decreases the number of complications. It decreases the requirement of pain medication. It decreases the readmission rate in 30 days, all simply because somebody demonstrated they care. And as another interesting study that was done, as you may or may not know, unfortunately, there's a subset of people who repeatedly present to the emergency room. And typically, these are poor people or people with substance abuse. But fundamentally, they're hurt people. And interestingly, a study was done that demonstrated if instead of mobilizing the entire healthcare team when one of these individuals came in, a nurse was assigned simply to talk to them and try as best they could to understand what was going on with them. This actually decreased the number of admissions or presentations to the ER by over 50%.
Amazing. Wow.
And so it shows you that the power of, if you will, the mind to positively impact someone's health is huge. The thing is, you just have to have them believe and you have to truly be someone who cares. And this has a huge, huge impact, but you can understand it. I mean, I'm sure whether it's you going shopping or meeting with somebody, a boss at work, if somebody's thoughtful, if they're kind, if they go out of their way to look at you as an individual and not as a problem,
Hmm.
it has a huge, huge positive impact. And so each of us has the ability to be that person to someone else. We just have to understand that we have that power within us to connect and to care with others. That is how we were designed to be.
Hmm.
When we act that way, it affects everyone's physiology. It affects the
Hmm.
other person. It affects you. And in fact, the Dalai Lama says, if you want to make others happy, be compassionate. If you wish to be happy, be compassionate.
Simple idea, right? And yet so hard today for many to implement, but it's so true. And Dr. Doty, you mentioned the Dalai Lama, who's also a benefactor of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford, which you are founder and director. How do you feel, coming off of what we discussed with compassionate medical spaces, medical schools are doing presently in preparing physicians of the future to be more compassionate and to really um, make it a priority, because it's not only good medicine, but it's actually, like you said, it's got ripple effects that ripple and extend way out. And so at Stanford in specific, how are physicians in training being prepared to be compassionate physicians? What is the curriculum that's being taught there? Is it incorporating enough of compassion and heart-centered work?
Well, certainly there are some efforts being made. It's certainly not enough. I had a former dean say to me, Jim, the students' curriculum is already too full to incorporate compassion into their training. Just like, you sit there and your head's about to explode. Uh, um, and the reality is, whether it's Stanford or other medical schools, a large percentage of medical students are either in therapy or on medication. This is also true of the faculty. Many of them are considering retiring early, leaving the profession. This is especially true among women. And we have not done a good enough job And the problem is also that the corporate practice of medicine, if you will, or the attention to the bottom line is such that it results in many physicians feeling as though they cannot do the job they were trained for. And this leads to something that has been called moral injury, which is incapacitating to many physicians because your goal is to do the right thing, yet because of financial implications, you're often limited from doing the right thing. And the other aspect is, as you may or may not be aware, private equity firms are actually now engaged in the practice of medicine. And what has happened, to give one example, is that they are now quite prevalent in the context of taking over emergency physician groups. And as a result, the pay has been decreased, the workload has been increased, the attention to caring has been markedly diminished, while the attention to profit making through efficient billing and utilizing every mechanism to extract from insurance companies and also decrease care to the poor uh, uh, has resulted in many people becoming more and more unhappy. And this can translate then into internal medicine or hospitalist groups. And as we know, the goal of private equity is to be maximally extractive with zero interest in caring for people. And you can see it by their other actions, whether it's corporate takeovers, which when they do so, they load debt onto a corporate entity and take their money out. And these types of practices have resulted in a greater than 10x increase in bankruptcy rates among those types of companies.
Wow.
So the private equity involvement or the corporate practice of medicine has been a complete disaster. Medicine was never meant to be a business per se, where you always look at the bottom line. And that's not to say you aren't aware of it, but that should not be the center of what you're doing. But this is becoming more and more prevalent in society. And again, this supports the notion, as I mentioned earlier, about the extractive nature of corporate entities or the billionaire class who make massive profits because they have insider knowledge compared to the average person. And we've also, of course, allowed for uh, corporate entities in the billionaire class to impact legislation. And in fact, I'm sure you're aware that a lot of legislation is actually written by these groups and given to the senator. And there is unlimited ability to create political action groups that support legislatures or legislators to do the bidding, and whether it's the Democrat or Republican side. And this has become a complete disaster for the average person in America and has actually dramatically resulted in stagnation of wages to the benefit of corporations.
Absolutely horrible to see how pervasive this issue is. And like you said, within the political system, within the medical system, and it's eroding what medicine's supposed to be about, what politics are supposed to be about. And it's painful to see, but I know there are good people doing good work and trying to keep the values where they are within these systems, these broader systems. Dr. Doty, I wanted to touch a little bit more on your work at the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education. Can you share with our audience a little bit more about the work that you do there, and where patients can access some of the research that you may be doing there, or where they can learn more about the projects that you've done or are aiming to do at this center.
Sure. Well, we wrote a groundbreaking book called the Oxford Handbook of Compassion Science that came out in 2017, and we're doing a new edition now. But there's a lot of information that looks at this from a global perspective. What I mean, looking at all sorts of areas, whether it's parenting, all the way to, that's my dog barking out there.
Oh, I did not hear, but I was
Oh,
actually before the interview going to say, if you hear a dog bark here, it's my sister's dog, Yogi. He's a Frenchie, and he's very vocal.
can you hold on for 1 second? He's barking at
Sure.
something. Sorry about that. That was
No worries.
UPS
Oh,
delivering
okay.
something or other.
What kind of dog?
Ringo, he's a come here, come here, come here, come on, come on. Well, he's sort of antisocial, but there he is. Ringo.
Oh,
He's a
so
big dog. He
sweet.
weighs about
Oh,
80 pounds. So
wow.
anyway, he's half Labradoodle, half Golden Doodle.
Oh, wow. I always wanted a golden, but there's such a beautiful mixture.
No, it's actually very nice. You know, the purpose of a doodle is to have a dog that doesn't shed. But
Yes.
unfortunately, I did not like the hair on any of his litter mates, so I picked him. Unfortunately, he sheds like shit, which pisses my wife off. So
Oh.
what can I tell you? Where were we?
Oh, I'm sorry. We were discussing
No,
the
it's not your
work
fault.
of the work of your organization, the Center for Compassion and
Ah,
Altruism Research and Education.
yeah. So I mentioned the handbook, Oxford Handbook of Compassion Science, and we've also published a lot in peer-reviewed journals. Uh, the other thing that we do is we do training for healthcare providers, physicians, nurses, and paraprofessionals, also for first responders. We have a applied compassion training program, which has attracted people from 60 different countries so far, where we mentor those students to develop their own capstone project, which they then implement at their organization. Most of these people are from the corporate environment or from healthcare environments, and a number from the mind body wellness space. And that's a certificate program. And then we do customized corporate training programs throughout the world, actually. So it's a whole spectrum of things. The other thing that I've been working on, independent of the center at Stanford, is a mental health app that utilizes emotion assessment with a conversational AI knowledge base of compassion focused therapy and psychology, combined with a human-like avatar
Wow.
to deal with issues of stress, anxiety, and loneliness. And that company is called Happy, Happi.ai,
Mhm.
Happi.ai. because everybody has a tendency to spell it Happy. So it's
Right. PPI.
HAPPI.ai. Maybe you could put that in the show notes or whatever. But
Yeah.
um, so that's been specifically designed to deal with these types of issues. And as you know, many people, when they have those types of situations of stress, anxiety, or loneliness, they may turn to apps like Headspace or
Mm-hmm.
Calm.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge with those is that the churn rate on those is very, very high because most people don't stick with them. And there are all sorts of reasons for that. The other option is something, as we know, which is online therapy, but that's very expensive for many people. And then they have chatbots where you can just type in how you feel. The problem is there's no ability to understand valence. And what I mean by that, if you were to type in, I'm sad, you don't know whether that's sad, I'm about to commit suicide, or I'm
Right.
sad because I stubbed my toe.
Right.
What and then the other thing is, if you have a therapist after 5 o'clock, you don't have a therapist, right? If you were to call up, it says, please call 911 if this is a life-threatening emergency, which that's sort of the last thing you want to hear if you're calling your therapist. So what this does is it utilizes human-like avatar, which is available 24/7, and most people's stress, anxiety, and loneliness occur in the evenings. You can chat as much as you want with the avatar. It
Wow.
has been trained to have a conversation, to make recommendations, to actually practice, let's say, a meditation practice with you. Um, and this is very, very powerful. And the reason I say that is that we know that simply having a conversation with somebody, and they don't have to be a therapist at all, simply having a empathic, compassionate conversation with somebody has a huge, huge impact in dissipating one's feelings of anxiety and stress or loneliness.
Right.
And unlike a chatbot where you're typing into the universe, you're actually interacting with a human-like avatar. And the reason that makes a difference is whether we like it or not, if there is actually what appears to be a human talking to you, you connect with it like a human. And the very nature of
Mm-hmm.
that calms you down. Now, this is not to say that the purpose of this is to separate you from talking to humans, but if you can get comfortable and relax, it facilitates you returning back to your regular life, if you will, and not be incapacitated by these feelings. So
Right.
we have not officially launched, but if anybody wants to try it, for the moment, it's free, and you
Oh,
simply
that's
sign up.
wonderful.
Yeah, you simply sign up and use it and see what you think. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
would say it's not perfect yet. As you know, with any of these things, it's an iterative process, but actually, people have found it very helpful. We did a study that demonstrated on a self-report study, and we asked people to use it for a minimum of 10 minutes a day for 1 week. And the study measures, gives people an option of choosing normal or extremely severe in terms of stress, anxiety, and depression, that over 70% had a 2-level improvement after 1 week.
Wow.
And so it's really quite powerful. And actually, there's some people who will spend 15, 20, 30 minutes actually talking to the avatar
A day.
at a session. So
Oh,
now there are some people it may be 5 minutes, but my point is that you can talk as much as you want, and for many people, they find it helpful and find it a soothing presence. So give it a
that's really
shot.
wonderful. Yeah, and so our audience members, Dr. Doty, can find this. Where can they find the link to this?
Just look up Happy, HAPPI.ai, and it's right there. And you can use it on any device, whether it's your cell phone or whether it's your computer.
Wonderful. And does it also connect individuals to resources if they're not currently with resources, or is this just a supplemental for people who are already in therapy or
Well,
may
you
not
don't
be
have
done?
to you don't have to be in therapy at all. It does connect you with resources in terms of online type of activities, meditation practices, or other types of practices. Um, Eventually, we will partner with entities that offer therapy if somebody chooses, or if somebody's in therapy, we can actually send their therapist a summary of the conversations to keep them informed. And also, if someone's having a crisis, it will actually note that and then try to talk them through part of it. And if they're unsuccessful, then it will connect them with a therapist or emergency resources.
That is wonderful. That sounds like an amazing project you have. That is, I know you said not launched yet, but on the way to.
Yeah, it should be launched in a few months. I mean, it's being used all the time by a lot of people, but we're not charging for it because we're trying to gather
Right,
data about the user experience.
right. Absolutely wonderful. Very exciting. Dr. Doty, just one last question, which ties into a little bit of what the work you're doing with Happy AI. It focuses on narrative medicine and really the importance of sharing one's story. And so the question is, narrative medicine, which incorporates therapeutic storytelling in clinical practice, is becoming more prominent in healthcare. How important do you think storytelling is in one's personal healing journey, in particular, but in particular on the heart, which tends to carry a lot of the stress, and
Sure. Well, as you know, there's something called broken heart syndrome, which was first described in the Japanese. And when somebody has a particular profound stress related to a relationship, this can actually result in somebody's heart actually stopping with no disease. These types of narratives can be very powerful in a negative context. But that being said, it can also be extraordinarily powerful in a positive context. If somebody has the right mental state, it has a huge, huge impact in a positive way on their health, and conversely. And this is why it's important to try to nurture a positive mindset uh, rather than a negative one. And of course, all of us have a negative dialogue going on in our head. And what many people don't realize, that dialogue is not truth, uh, although many people believe it is. And that dialogue actually results in an individual, if you will, having limited beliefs. And what I mean by that is if you tell yourself, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, this is bad, I cannot, then that by definition becomes your reality. Conversely, you can boost your immune system, you can decrease the production of inflammatory proteins, you can positively impact your heart rate variability through different types of training, all of which have a very, very positive physiologic impact. And in fact, we know through compassion training that this actually increases one's longevity. So, being thoughtful, being kind, being compassionate is the baseline where we're meant to live. And if we live that way, that has a positive impact on every aspect of our lives, not only interacting with others in that deep emotional connection, but also conversely on our physiologic and brain health.
so true, so very true. And that this concludes our interview series. I want to thank you so much once again for taking the time to meet and share in this conversation. I know you've covered a lot of ground and a lot of important topics and offered our audience many valuable insights and wisdom. So thank you for taking the time, to talk with me and speak with our audience members. Greatly appreciative.
No problem. And as you mentioned, my book, Into the Magic Shop, there's a new
Mhm.
book that just came out called Mind Magic, The Neuroscience of Manifestation. You can find out about Happy, which I already mentioned, the website, and the center at Stanford, which is CCARE, CCARE.stanford.edu. And thank you so much. And thank you to all your listeners. And I hope our conversation has been helpful.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Dr. Doty.
Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.